All right, we're back. It is a beautiful fall day here in October, and we have the good doctor. Can I call you the doctor?
Absolutely.
All right.
Reverend Doctor.
Reverend Dr. Waibel is with us today, which is fitting because it is Minister Appreciation Month, and we're excited to have the vicar on our staff.
The vicar?
So, Jeff, let's start with that. Let's start with your duties as a minister and how that relates to Gateway Woods.
Okay. Yeah, how does it relate to Gateway Woods? It's really interesting. I think that since just about everybody who works at Gateway is a member of the church, I have a lot of overlap. A lot of the congregants also work with me, which is kind of fun. I mean, you get to know them better than maybe a typical minister would, because you get to know them in a work setting, which is totally different. Go through high stress things together, which is totally different. And of course, we take our residents to church with us, and so the residents get to see you in two different lights too, which is interesting. But yeah, I think overall it's been very positive, I would say.
Very good. And so you're part of the Troika, which
do we need to define terms?
That's a Russian word, right?
Yeah. So a Troika is a Russian three-horse team that pulls a cart, and that we call ourselves a Troika. It's the executive leadership team, it's the technical term, but we call ourselves the Troika because there are three of us that kind of oversee general operations here at Gateway. So Ed Graff, the executive director, Mark Maybach, the CFO, and then myself as clinical director.
So Troika is a relatively new moniker to you guys, but has it always been structurally that way, or is that something new as well?
No, this is a new thing. So ever since, I'm going to say 2014, 2013, somewhere in there, we went to this system. There was a leadership transition that happened, and there was not an official executive director for a while. So there's a little inside scoop.
We are behind the curtain.
Yeah. Okay, pull the curtain back. So during, I don't know, maybe about a 6-month period of time, I was actually the executive director of Gateway Woods.
Do you still have your name?
I don't. I
can get you one.
I never got a tag, a name tag. Yeah. So I was acting executive director when Jeff Schumacher left, and before Ed Graff was appointed the new executive director. I was in that role because I held the right degrees and licenses, etc., to keep the place, afloat. So I was the acting executive director, and then Ed was hired, and then we went to more of an executive leadership team. Okay. Ed is still in charge because he's power hungry and all that. But no, he is still in charge, unquestionably. But there is strength in a multitude of counselors, and so he leans on Mark and I when we meet every other week, and we discuss kind of the big picture stuff for the organization.
Yeah, and there's that extra layer of accountability and just a sounding board.
Yeah, exactly.
Very good. As always, if you have questions from the field, please chime in, and we'll keep moving. So, okay, so I'm not going to ask your age, but you've been here how many years?
41.
41, okay.
No, that's my age, not how long I've been here. So.
I was like, you've asked Jan as far as your sheet.
I was hired at the very end of 2001, but I actually didn't start until the beginning of January 2002. So I've been here 16 and a half years.
Okay, wow. And so what have been some of your titles? Other than executive director?
Other than executive director, I was hired as a counselor first out of the gate, and then fairly quickly within maybe 2 years, I was promoted to supervising, what we used to call supervising counselor, which is a bit of a joke because there was only one other counselor. And so it was one counselor supervising another counselor. And by the way, the other counselor, Loretta Schaefer, who, I don't know if she was on Facebook or not, but she knew way more about the job than I did. But she was on her way out, I was on my way in, so I was the supervisor, which was kind of a funny role. And then very quickly, I also took over the home base program right around that same time. So then I got to double my direct reports from 1 to 2, because back at that time, only Kevin Fichter was doing home base. So, and then the years went by, and supervising counselor changed, the title changed, to Director of Clinical Services, and maybe there was another title in there somewhere, but I don't remember it. But that's essentially what I've been ever since. The role has continued to expand just because of state regulations and requirements for degrees and licensure to do various things, and we've had leadership changes in various programs, and so there have been times where I've been the head of foster care. There have been times that I've been the head of adoption, or not really the head of adoption, but holding the right degrees,
Sure.
etc., to oversee adoption. Not to be confused with actually doing any work in foster care or adoption, but mostly just supervising the people who actually knew what they were doing.
Very
So
good.
I have a long storied history of supervising people who know more than me.
Okay.
Does that include your summer as volunteer coordinator?
I didn't think that was going to come up. I thought that was off limits for this. Yeah, I was the summer volunteer coordinator in 1998. It was a good year, 20 years ago this year, and really enjoyed it. There were some really interesting relationships that actually started during that summer that have continued to this day. So, for example, Eric Wiegand was one of my volunteers. Tim Wiegand was one of my volunteers. Lucy Cook was one of my volunteers during that summer. All of these people I still have relationships with to this day. So yeah, it was a good summer. There was a few rough spots where I ticked off the volunteers and kind of ruled with an iron fist. It didn't go over so well. Might have been the only volunteer coordinator to ever get picketed by the volunteers. That happened once, but we'll leave that for a different day.
So back in '98, was that your first exposure to Gateway Woods? Or?
No, so I have a long history of Gateway Woods. I had a sister and brother-in-law who were house parents here, I believe early 90s, 93,
Okay.
something like that. And then I had another sister who was an assistant house parent here 95 to 97 or 98, something
Okay.
like that, before she got married. And so, yeah, I've kind of been interacting with Gateway for a long, long time, 25 years probably.
Wow.
I started volunteering myself in 95, so.
Okay. Very good. So mathematically, how were you able to do that? Like, how old were you?
I was 18 in 1995, and so that's when you could volunteer. At least back then, that was the age to volunteer. And so I started volunteering, volunteered in 95, 96, 97, volunteer
Okay.
coordinator in 98.
Nice. Very good. So looking back over the years, I guess when your first exposure and then today, how do you feel? Obviously, Gateway's changed a lot. The culture, kind of the atmosphere. I'm not going to ask you if it's better or worse, but how has it changed? I guess, what is a positive way that it's changed?
Okay, so I would say probably the biggest change is just the sheer size. So when I was hired here, we had 3 houses. Foster care was kind of a part-time thing that we did, like one person did part-time.
Yeah.
Adoption adoption was part-time for one person. Foster care was 1.5 people. Home base was 1 person. So all these programs that are now getting bigger and bigger, not to mention just we've added residential houses too. It's definitely changed a lot. So we went from maybe 30 staff when I was hired to now we regularly have 50 or more here. So that's been a big change and a positive change because we're constantly getting new blood and new people, which brings a new energy to the business. I would say we've gotten a lot more professional over the years just because of state requirements, contract requirements, things like that. I tend to see that as a positive thing.
Yeah.
There are probably some negative aspects to it, like house parent paperwork loads go up and things like that. We have to do a lot more training than we used to do and a lot more specific degrees and licensure and things like that for counselors. I tend to think a lot of those things make us better though.
No, I would agree.
Yeah.
And just as a house parent, and then now looking back in my role in the communications, it's been really cool to see. It just continually grows and it continually evolves. And I think any kind of ministry, any kind of business, you want it to grow to a certain degree because if it's just stale, that's not good. That's not good business.
Right. I agree.
So we kind of covered just your history with Gateway Woods. What's kind of a fun memory that you have through the years that just really kind of, Because honestly, any job can be mundane at times, but what's something that you fall back on and just like makes you laugh or just like keeps you going?
Oh man, we have a lot of fun here. This work is, I mean, you know this better than most, having been a house parent yourself, but this work is really, really heavy work. It's really, really weighty. It's serious. The state contract stuff is dead serious. The troubles that our kids and their families are dealing with are very, very serious. You gotta laugh. You gotta stay light. And so there have been lots and lots of those situations over the years. Clint Plattner is one of our staff here. He's the residential manager right now, overseeing house parents. He and I and Janice Anlicker, who's the education director, we meet every week as part of the residential leadership team. And we just have a grand time. If you ever walk by here, you'll hear us laughing and stuff. Just because the topics we're dealing with are so big and so heavy. And we have a good sense of humor about it. But specific stories there's so many things. But I always tell this story. This is just one of my favorite stories because it shows multiple sides of the organization. But I was counselor at this time. I was called in the middle of the night because one of the kids that I was responsible for was feeling suicidal, which is not funny, by the way.
No.
But he was feeling suicidal. I came in. Again, this is 2-3 in the morning. It's the dead of winter. It's ice cold outside. I come in and I talk to him in the house, and he was really down. He was really struggling, lots of family issues and things. And I went through what we had a suicide assessment that we do. So we went through the questions with him. And one of the questions on there is, do you have a plan? So we have to talk about a plan, because if they have a plan, then we have to take it a lot more seriously. Sure. So I asked him if he had a plan, and he says, "Yeah, I'm gonna drown myself in the pond." And I was thinking to myself, okay, it's January. The pond probably has about 6 inches of ice on it. And so I was like, have you thought about how you're going to get through the ice, to get to this? And he obviously had just like entered his brain, and he looked really confused for a minute, and then he just busted out laughing, and the moment was over, and just like that, like something had broke for him, and he was able to kind of get through that night. And it's a kind of a sweet memory because it was a very, very serious situation. But again, just a little tiny bit of humor injected. And I knew this kid really well, and we had a great relationship. We got through that night because of humor. And this is many, many years ago, and this resident's now an adult, has kids and everything else. But yeah, I have so many stories like that. Everybody who works here has stories like that, where it's serious stuff, but we see, the will to get through. And yeah, obviously God was at work too. I'm sure the house parents were praying in the office or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I used humor to break through, just getting out of these just kind of serious situations that didn't need to be serious.
Right. We forget about this sometimes, but our clients are kids. Yeah. And I love working with teenagers because, for one, that's my maturity level, I guess, but also, but they have such a great spirit of fun. So really enjoy that.
Yeah, no, that's really good. So speaking of accreditations, we're kind of in the middle of CARF. Speaking to that a little bit, why CARF? Like what's...
Yeah. So CARF is a national accrediting body. So there's there's federal legislation that passed earlier this year, February-ish. That one of the byproducts of that is it required places like Gateway Woods to become nationally accredited by toward the end of 2019. And so it laid out 3 different accreditation bodies that you could become accredited through, and we chose CARF for lots of reasons I won't get into because they're boring. But CARF is the Council on Accreditation Rehabilitation Facilities, or I believe that's right. Council on the Accreditation for Rehabilitation Facilities, And so we are in the middle of coming up to their standards. So they have a list of standards. That's what accreditation is. It's a list of standards so that everybody who's accredited under this accreditation body is doing approximately the same high standards of work across the board. So that's what accreditation is. And so we're in the middle of that. We're in the middle of not only trying to understand their standards, but then elevate what we do to match their standards. It's a massive amount of work that's involving probably every single member of the residential program is involved at some level, whether implementation of new things or writing new policies, procedures, manuals. I mean, there's just tons and tons of things. So we're in the middle of that, and our go live date with all the accreditation standards for CARF is December 1st. So that's the date when we have to be full speed ahead, operating under their standards, so that in the middle of 2019 they can come in and evaluate how we're doing, so that then that will give us accreditation. So we have to operate under their standards for 6 months before they can evaluate us to see how we're doing with it. And then after they evaluate us, hopefully they'll accredit us. I hope you're watching CARF Blasted, you better accredit us after all this work. But so hopefully they'll accredit us, and then we'll be ready for the federal language that goes into effect October of 2019. So.
Okay, so this isn't really replacing anything, it's just an addition.
No, it's brand new. Okay. So this is an addition. Yeah, so we've always had a state license to do what we do, a residential child caring institution license. We've always had that ever since the late 70s was when we first got it. So we've had that for 40 years. What's new about, and then we've had state contracts for various things. We've had, home-based contract, residential contract, foster care contract. What's new now is the national accreditation piece. So we've never taken that step. We haven't really needed to up until now, up until it became mandated. But now we are. We're taking that's kind of a big leap. But this is something the federal government's very invested in. They want to see high quality services, and frankly, so do we.
So does that allow us to reach outside of Indiana then?
No, of course not. It doesn't work like that. We are nationally accredited, but that doesn't mean that we are a national organization, because the funding to pay for young people to be placed here at Gateway Woods, the funding largely comes from the state of Indiana.
Sure.
So each state, controls the money spent in their state. So if we were to take a kid from Illinois, they would have to send Illinois tax dollars to Indiana. By the way, that's not a politically correct thing to do.
Yeah.
So we virtually never get official state placements from other states. Now we'll get private placements, like a family places their child here from another state. That's happened many times, but that doesn't have any state funding associated with it.
Okay.
So the national accreditation is required because it's federal legislation, not because we're going to become suddenly a national organization.
Okay. Sounds good. Do we have any thoughts? Emily, do you have any other questions?
I was going to ask, were you still a counselor when you were put into the ministry?
That's a great, I think I was. I was probably getting toward the end of my counseling time here. So I've been here, let's say 16 and a half years, and I was a counselor for roughly half of that time, and the rest of it I've been in some sort of administrative role. So because if the math doesn't add up there, I was the supervising counselor at the same time I was a counselor. Yeah. So I was doing both for about 6 years, and then in about eight and a half years ago, I became full-time administrative type stuff. So, but I was put into the ministry over 9 years ago. So there was a slight overlap where I was both a minister and a counselor.
So were you ever tempted to use stories of your residents in a sermon?
No, I don't think I ever have done that. We have, a little thing called HIPAA that sort of precludes that, not to mention all kinds of, privacy laws and stuff. But no, I don't think I've ever done that. However, I sometimes use illustrations that my kids or Gateway residents would know because maybe I've used it with them, or maybe it's an inside joke or something like that, just to try to keep their attention. So, yeah, we've probably done that, but I don't think I've ever used stories or residents over the pulpit. Could be wrong. Somebody could prove me wrong.
Let's go back to the tape. So, antiquing. Talk about antiquing, because I know that you love. Is it an antiquer? A teaker? What is it?
Yeah, so this is something that is kind of, it's kind of my wife's fault, probably, but my wife and I, shout out to my wife, not that she'll probably watch this, but my wife and I, when we got married, we were very different people in lots and lots of ways. We're very different people. And one of the things we struggled with was finding free time, leisure activities that we both liked.
Okay.
She was really into certain things, and I was really into certain things, and never the twain shall meet. So
like family bike rides.
Yes, she's really into family bike rides. I'm really into family more than the bike rides. So anyway, one of the things that we both liked to do was go to antique shops, and so we did. We walked around antique shops. That was kind of some of our earliest bonding experiences. It was something that when we go on vacation or something, it was something we could always do and not fight. So I'm making it sound worse than it is. We don't fight.
Are you kind of like Chip Gaines when you go in there and try stuff on and like?
We do have a lot of fun with it. I'm probably not like Chip Gaines, whoever the world that is, but we do have a good time.
Okay. Very good.
Do you have a favorite item that you found, or the most unique item you've found while you're antiquing?
What's your Mickey Mantle card? Because there's something there that's eluding you that you want.
So I was not prepared for the conversation to go this direction, but I found a few niches that I have been able to kind of make some good scores where I bought something and then resold it. So a few things that I for a while kind of specialized in. One was antique calculators, which is such a weird niche.
Like an abacus or
no, not prehistoric calculators. No, actual like
can of beans?
Electronic calculators, like from the 60s when they first came out with pocket calculators, and they were very, very expensive. You can kind of tell because they usually have a red glowing screen. The really old ones. I went through a streak once where I found 2 or 3 of them for dirt cheap, and then turned around and sold them for hundreds of dollars because there are really avid collectors of these.
So is this before Texas Instruments, or
no? Texas Instruments was definitely on the cutting edge of that.
Okay.
Yep. So that would be one of the big names.
Nice.
So that's just one example, but more reliably musical instruments, things like that.
Okay.
That I know some things about. So.
But what are you looking for? Like, what is one item that you want?
Okay, John, you're showing your ignorance here. When you go antiquing or garage sailing or thrift shopping or flea market, shopping, you can't go looking for things. You have to go and with very little expectations. Otherwise, you're going to miss stuff.
Sure.
If you go looking for that one item, I don't know what it would be for you, but if you're going to go looking for that one item, you're going to miss the really great item right next to it. So you go with an open mind.
Okay. See, for me, I like board games. So like vintage board games are kind of fun and I was on a stretch, I think in college, where I bought them on eBay for like super cheap, and some were good, some not so good, but I still have the 1964 Acquire, and it's a gym. It's a beautiful game. So
it's a gym?
A gym, yeah.
Okay.
A good find.
A good find.
Very good. So, ordained deacon, explain to those of us that are lay, right? Is that what does that entail?
So our church has kind of 2 levels of official church leadership. We have elders. Not every church has an elder, but most of the larger churches have elders. Or then smaller churches have a counseling elder, maybe somebody who's not part of their congregation but comes in once a month or something. Then we have ordained deacon. So the difference between the two is slight. in some ways, but big in other ways. So elders participate in the elder body, which is the leadership of the whole denomination. Ordained deacons are not part of that body, but locally in the local church, we are part of the leadership, and we do virtually everything that the elder does, with just a couple of small exceptions. So it's more of a local church leadership position. You still have to be approved by the elder body of the denomination, but it's more of a local leadership. That's probably the best way to think of it. Elder is a local plus denominational leadership.
Okay.
Ordained deacon is local only.
Very good. So what is one thing that you've learned over the years that God has taught you that has just been very impactful being at Gateway?
It means something I've learned specifically here at
Yeah.
Gateway. Okay. Man, there's so many things. So I've been here long enough that, Gateway has shaped a lot of the way I look at the whole world.
Yeah.
So it's a little hard to separate out. But I would say just the sheer value of human life. So we all say that we value human life, and of course we do. But it's been interesting working with people that maybe before Gateway I would have turned my nose up on the street, and then having to work with them in a family counseling session or as a resident or in the home-based world or something, people who are struggling with homelessness or drug addiction or whatever. It's very easy, I think. It would have been easy for me, and maybe it's easy for a lot of people, to dismiss such people as being somehow below us. And at Gateway, we never can do that, because not only has God taught us there, but for the grace of God go I, but also there are clients, there are customers, there are eventually they become our friends. I mean, the relationship grows, and so I've seen that happen over and over and over again, and not only in my life, but in the life of house parents and counselors and home-based workers and foster care workers, as they kind of get this bigger picture of what it means to be made in the image of God, and how that it includes everybody and excludes nobody.
Yeah, I think what you're speaking of is a word that I didn't really know until I came here. Was empathy.
Yeah.
And just having that heart change, because when we are living kind of for ourselves, which we all do to a certain degree, our peripherals are blinded. But Gateway has a way of opening our peripherals, because the fringe people are coming into our lives in more ways than one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, that empathy, that compassion, but it changes your outlook. My wife and I went to New York City about, 5-6 years ago, and we were just walking. We just enjoy big cities, and we were walking through New York City. Not a lot of good antique shops in New York City, right? Real estate's too valuable, probably. But we were walking through New York City, and there's obviously a large homelessness problem in this country, especially in big urban areas like that. And we were passing people, and New Yorkers are just flooding by, don't even give people a second look. And meanwhile, this guy who's sitting on the ground asking for change or whatever, is a child of God, made in the image of God, has a soul that's going to have an eternal destiny somewhere. And here at Gateway, we get really in tune to that. I think a lot of the world tries to get out of tune with it, because it's maybe too painful to think about, or don't know what to do about it, or it's just a real inconvenience or nuisance.
Yeah, very good. Is there anything else you'd like to add? We do have some openings, so I guess share that a little bit.
I already have a job, John, but thanks for letting me know.
Well, if you wanted a new title, you could switch positions.
Oh my God. Yeah, seems like we always have openings, and this is something that people don't always understand about Gateway, and I've heard this before. I go to another apostolic Christian church, and people are like, you guys are always hiring, you just have a hard time keeping people. The things that they don't get are, number one, the sheer number of people it takes to run this ministry. 50 to 55 people at any given time. That's way more than they think. And so they're usually thinking there's maybe 20 people here.
Sure.
And so just with that large of a group, you are going to have pretty much constant turnover. Second, the transience of today's workforce. So the average person is in a job less than 5 years. So 55 people, less than 5 years, you're going to have a certain number of people turning over every single year. About 10 if you do the math on that. And third, they don't understand just how stressful this work is and how it kind of can eat away at you. So we're always looking for people. Right now, our biggest needs are in education, so we need teachers. We need house parent couples, specifically house parent couples. Those are kind of the big holes right now. We need people like you once in a while. It's not, all critical, but but these positions affect the ministry in really big ways, because if we don't have enough house parents, we actually have to sometimes take houses offline for a while, and all of a sudden our mission impact is less. Mm-hmm. So we can operate without you, no offense. Operate without house parents, not possible. That actually affects mission bottom line, which is to reach people for Christ, to turn lives around and make a positive impact on this world. So,
very well said. So, be praying either for yourselves or for family, friends, or for God just to open doors for other people. We are thankful for this ministry. It's really just really a big pulse to this community here at Leo in the Graybull area in Greater Fort Wayne in Indiana. Mm-hmm. And so we need it to keep going, and God is ultimately glorified through this ministry, and so that's what we're most thankful for. So just join us in prayer for next month. It is National Adoption Month, and so just keeping those families in mind, the kids, the children that are in line to be adopted, or children that have not been adopted yet. It's just such a great thing that God has put into all of our lives and on our hearts. So with that, we'll see you next week.